Rachel Dawson was used to carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Life as a single mom was a constant balancing act. Early mornings, long shifts at the diner, rushing home to pick up her son from school, checking homework, making dinner, cleaning up, and then doing it all over again the next day. There was never enough time, never enough money, and certainly never enough energy. But somehow she kept going. She had to for her 7-year-old boy, Ethan, who depended on her for everything. The one steady presence in her life outside of Ethan was Shadow, her German Shepherd. Shadow was no ordinary dog. He had once been a military K9, deployed overseas to detect explosives and protect soldiers. When he retired from service, Rachel had adopted him from a veterans rescue program, thinking he might be good company for her son. What she hadn't expected was the bond that quickly formed between them all. Shadow seemed to understand their struggles in ways that went beyond words. He was loyal, protective, and surprisingly gentle with Ethan. For Rachel, who often felt the loneliness of empty evenings, Shadow filled the silence with warmth. That Friday evening, the sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the small town in dusky shades of purple and orange. The streets were quiet, the kind of stillness only small towns seem to carry once the day winds down. Ethan was asleep earlier than usual, worn out from a school field trip. Rachel, restless after hours of chores, decided to take Shadow for a walk. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine from the wooded trails at the edge of town. Rachel pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she clipped the leash to Shadow's collar. The big dog's ears perked up immediately, tail swishing with anticipation. Walks were his favorite, and they were Rachel's too. It was the one time she could breathe, think, and step outside of the grind of her daily responsibilities. As they left their modest little house and walked down the cracked sidewalk toward the trail, Rachel's mind wandered. She thought about her bills, always just one paycheck away from disaster. She thought about Ethan's future, the way he asked about things she couldn't afford: new shoes, a bike, even just a trip to the amusement park he saw on TV. Sometimes, late at night, she worried she wasn't enough, that she couldn't give him what he needed. Shadow, as if sensing her thoughts, nudged her hand with his cold nose. Rachel smiled faintly and stroked the side of his head. "I know, boy," she murmured. "We'll be okay." "We always are." They reached the entrance to the wooded trail, a dirt path winding through tall pines and brush. It wasn't far from her neighborhood, but at night it felt secluded, like stepping into another world. Crickets chirped, owls hooted in the distance, and the crunch of gravel under her sneakers echoed softly in the stillness. For Rachel, it was peaceful. For Shadow, it was something more. His ears twitched at every sound, his nose lifted to test the breeze. Even in retirement, his instincts never dulled. He was a soldier at heart, always alert, always scanning. Rachel let her thoughts drift again as they walked. She remembered the first day she brought Shadow home. Ethan had been scared at first. Shadow was big, muscular, and carried a seriousness in his eyes that made him seem almost human. But within a week, Ethan was sneaking him treats under the table and curling up with him on the couch. By the second month, they were inseparable. Now, Rachel couldn't imagine life without him. The night grew darker as they pressed further down the trail. A crescent moon peeked between the trees, casting pale silver light. Rachel wasn't worried. She knew these woods well. Still, she kept Shadow close, trusting his instincts more than her own. Halfway through the walk, Rachel paused, listening. The forest was quiet, but not the usual kind of quiet. This silence felt heavy. Even Shadow seemed to notice. He stiffened, muscles taut, ears pricked forward. His tail, once wagging lazily, froze. Rachel frowned, glancing around. "What is it?" she whispered, though she knew he couldn't answer. Shadow's gaze locked on the path ahead, and then she heard it faint at first, like a rustle of leaves, then heavier, like footsteps. Before she could make sense of it, a figure stumbled into view. Rachel's breath caught. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in fatigues. His face was pale, slick with sweat. His steps faltered as though every ounce of strength was draining from him. She barely had time to react before he collapsed onto the dirt path with a heavy thud. Shadow barked, sharp and protective, his body shifting in front of Rachel. Rachel's heart slammed against her ribs. She took a cautious step forward. "Sir, are you okay?" The man didn't respond, only groaned faintly. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Rachel dropped to her knees beside him, trying to shake him gently. "Hey, stay with me. Can you hear me?" He muttered something broken words, fragments that made no sense. "Heat mission. Can't." His head lolled to the side. Rachel's panic surged. Out here in the dark, with no one else around, she had stumbled into something she never expected. She was a single mom, just trying to get through another day, and now, a soldier's life was literally in her hands. Shadow whined low in his throat, standing close as if shielding both Rachel and the stranger. Rachel's mind raced. Should she run for help? Stay and try to help him? Could she even move him? Her phone was in her pocket, but she already knew what it would say. No service. She had walked this trail enough to know the dead spots. She stared at the soldier's pale face, the sweat dripping down his temple, the faint tremor in his fingers. Whoever he was, whatever had brought him here, one thing was certain: he was in danger of dying, and she was the only one who could do something about it. Rachel drew in a shaky breath, steeling herself. "Okay," she whispered, as much to herself as to Shadow. "We're going to help him. We have to." It was just an ordinary evening. Until at WSN, single quotes T. And Rachel's life was about to change forever. Rachel's knees pressed into the gravel as her breath quickened. The soldier lay motionless at her feet, his chest rising in shallow, uneven bursts, each one sounding weaker than the last. His uniform was dusty, the camo fabric stained dark with sweat. His dog tags glinted faintly in the moonlight as they slipped from beneath his collar. Shadow barked again, low and urgent, not the playful sound he used when chasing Ethan in the yard, but the sharp tone of a guardian. His tail was stiff, body rigid, eyes fixed on the stranger, as if analyzing whether he was friend or foe. Rachel placed a trembling hand on the man's shoulder and gave it a light shake. "Sir, can you hear me?" Her voice cracked, a whisper against the stillness of the woods. The man groaned, his eyelids fluttering open for the briefest moment. His lips parted, and words slipped out like a broken code. "Sergeant? Miller, too hot. Couldn't." His voice faded into silence, and his head rolled to the side. Rachel's heart lurched. Miller, that was his name. Whoever Sergeant Miller was, he was in serious trouble. Her instincts screamed to call 911, but when she fumbled her phone out of her pocket and glanced at the screen, her worst fear confirmed itself. No service. A little icon of a dead signal bar mocked her. She cursed under her breath. Out here, in the thick of the trail, she might as well have been stranded in another world. Rachel forced herself to breathe, to think. She had always been resourceful. Motherhood had left her no choice. But this was different. This wasn't about fixing a broken sink or stretching groceries to last until payday. This was life or death, and she was utterly unprepared. Shadow whined and moved closer to the soldier, sniffing his hand and glancing back at Rachel, as if demanding she do something. Rachel brushed sweaty strands of hair from her forehead and muttered, "I'm trying, boy." I don't even know where to start. The man's skin was hot to the touch, his pulse weak and fluttery beneath her fingers. She remembered reading about heat stroke once, how the body shuts down, how the organs can fail. It made sense now. His words too hot. He must have been training or lost in these woods for hours under the sun. Rachel's panic grew heavier. Stay with me, Sergeant Miller. Don't you quit on me now. She reached for his canteen, clipped to his belt, but it was bone dry. No water, no supplies, nothing that could buy them time. She glanced around, desperate. Trees loomed tall on every side, shadows stretching like long fingers across the trail. The air was still, the silence suffocating. The world outside this moment felt impossibly far away. And then Miller's body jerked, a violent shudder, before slumping back into stillness. No, no, no. Rachel's voice cracked as she pressed her hands to his chest, unsure what she was even supposed to do. She had no CPR training, no medical knowledge beyond basic first aid. All she could do was keep him awake, keep him tethered to consciousness until she found help. Her eyes darted to Shadow, who stood like a sentinel beside them, muscles tense, ears flicking at every sound in the woods. He looked at her again, his amber eyes piercing in the moonlight. And for the first time that night, Rachel wondered if Shadow knew more than she did about what came next. Don't leave me hanging. Oi, she whispered, voice trembling. Shadow gave a single bark, short and commanding, before lowering his head toward Miller, then darting a few feet down the path. He stopped, turned, and barked again louder this time. Rachel frowned, confused. What is it? You want me to follow? Shadow barked again, pacing back toward her, then back toward the path, insistent. Rachel looked down at Miller's limp form, torn between the impossible choice. She couldn't carry him. He was too heavy, his body dead weight. But she couldn't leave him alone either. Her chest tightened with the crushing weight of decision. Shadow barked again, urgent, his body trembling with energy. His gaze locked with hers, and in that moment, Rachel realized this wasn't just coincidence. Shadow had been trained for moments like this. He wasn't abandoning them, he was trying to lead her to something. Rachel bit her lip, her hands shaking as she tried to haul Miller into a sitting position. His head lolled against her shoulder, his weight pressing down on her. Every muscle in her body screamed with effort, but she managed to drag him a few inches, then a few more. Okay, she panted. We're coming. Just don't give up on me, Miller. Shadow moved ahead, pausing every few steps, looking back to ensure she followed. His barks echoed through the woods, sharp and rhythmic, like signals in the night. Rachel stumbled forward, dragging the soldier inch by inch, the gravel biting into her knees, sweat stinging her eyes. Every few feet, she had to stop, catch her breath, adjust his limp body. But Shadow never faltered. His barks grew louder, more determined, pulling her onward. The woods seemed endless, an unforgiving maze. But then through the dense trees, Rachel spotted something faint. A flicker of light, distant but real. Her heart surged with hope. There! She gasped, tears burning her eyes. You found something, didn't you, boy? Shadow barked once, sharp and certain, then sprinted ahead. Rachel followed the faint glow until the trees parted, revealing a small clearing. At the far edge, a ranger station stood, its porch light glowing faintly against the night. Rachel nearly sobbed with relief. She had walked this trail countless times, but never realized the ranger station was so close. Shadow had led her straight to it. She collapsed to her knees beside Miller, gasping for breath, her arms aching from dragging his weight. Her phone vibrated suddenly, bars flickering to life. She scrambled to dial 911, her fingers trembling so hard she nearly dropped it. As the operator answered, Rachel's voice cracked. I need help. A soldier, he collapsed on the trail. He's not breathing right. He's burning up. Please hurry. Shadow stood guard, pacing in tight circles, his sharp barks piercing the night like beacons. Rachel clutched Miller's hand, whispering frantically as she waited for help to arrive. "Don't you dare give up now. You hear me? You're going to make it. We're going to get you through this." In the stillness of that moment, Rachel realized something extraordinary. Her ordinary evening walk had transformed into a fight for another person's life. And she was no longer just a mother with a dog. She was the lifeline keeping a soldier alive. The ranger station's faint porch light glowed like a beacon, but inside it was dark and locked. Rachel tugged desperately on the handle, praying someone was inside. Nothing. Empty. The phone in her hand buzzed faintly. Her call to 911 had dropped before she'd finished giving details. She stared at the blank screen in horror. "Damn it," she whispered. The signal had flickered just long enough to tease hope, and now it was gone again. She was stranded, with no certainty help was even on the way. Behind her, Miller groaned, a low, pained sound that made Rachel's stomach clench. She hurried back to him, kneeling at his side. Shadow pressed close, sniffing Miller's face, his ears twitching as though every faint breath was a report. Rachel brushed damp strands of hair from her own face and tried to focus. Panic wouldn't save him. She had to think. "Okay," she whispered to herself, like she was convincing her own trembling hands to move. "You're not a nurse. You're not a medic. But you're here, and he needs you. So do what you can." She placed her palm against his cheek. His skin burned like fire. She tugged at his jacket, loosening the heavy fabric, and unbuttoned his undershirt to let the night air touch his overheated chest. "We need to cool you down," she murmured, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. His lips cracked as he whispered again, voice raw. "Water too hot. Mission." Rachel grabbed her own water bottle from the side pocket of her bag, but it was nearly empty, just a few gulps left. She hesitated, torn between giving him the last drops or saving them in case he needed more later. Then she looked at his face, pale and drawn, and the decision was made. She tilted the bottle to his lips, coaxing him to drink. Most of it spilled down his chin, but a trickle made it into his mouth. He coughed weakly, then swallowed. "That's it," she whispered, relief washing over her. "Stay with me? Just keep swallowing." She knew it wasn't enough. His pulse fluttered beneath her fingers, faint and irregular, like a bird trapped in his chest. His breath came shallow, every inhale sounding weaker than the last. Rachel's chest tightened. She thought of Ethan, sleeping peacefully in their little house, unaware his mother was kneeling in the dirt with a stranger's life in her hands. She thought of what it meant, how quickly life could tilt from ordinary to extraordinary, from safe to dangerous. Shadow whined softly and nudged Rachel's arm, drawing her focus back. His eyes glistened in the dim light, sharp and alert. He wasn't panicking. He was waiting, watching, steady as stone. Rachel took a breath. If Shadow wasn't panicking, neither could she. She tried to keep Miller conscious, patting his face gently. "Hey, soldier. Come on. Tell me your name again." "You said Miller, right? Sergeant Miller?" His eyes flickered open for a moment. "Miller," he rasped. "That's right. I'm Rachel. This is Shadow. You're not alone, okay? You're going to be fine." She spoke firmly, like she was speaking into his soul. Like sheer will could anchor him to the world. For a second, she thought it worked. His gaze locked on hers, glassy but present. Then his eyelids sagged shut again. His chest rose unevenly, like his body was deciding whether to keep trying. "No," Rachel whispered fiercely, grabbing his hand. "Don't you dare. You hear me? You survived whatever hell put you in this uniform. You can survive this too." Her mind screamed at her to do something. Anything. But what could she do? She remembered vague advice about heatstroke shade, water, cooling the body. She ripped off her cardigan, soaked the fabric with the last dribble from her bottle, and pressed it to his forehead. It wasn't much, but it was something. Minutes dragged like hours. The woods were suffocatingly still, the silence broken only by Miller's ragged breaths and Shadow's occasional whines. Rachel felt the weight of time pressing down on her. How long before help came, if it came at all? Her phone buzzed again. She snatched it up one bar. Hope surged as she dialed 911 again, pressing the phone hard to her ear. Static. A garbled voice. She shouted into the receiver. Sergeant collapsed. Heat stroke. Ranger station off Pine Hollow Trail. Please send someone fast. The call cut out. She had no idea if they'd heard her. Rachel clutched the phone to her chest, trembling. Her eyes darted back to Miller. His body twitched, a tiny convulsion that made her stomach drop. His breathing faltered, then resumed, shallower than before. God, please, she whispered. She had never been the type to pray, but now the words spilled out unbidden. Please don't let him die here. Not in front of me. Not in front of Shadow. Shadow suddenly barked, loud and sharp, startling Rachel. His body stiffened, ears pointed toward the trail behind them. Rachel's pulse spiked. For a wild second, she feared it was someone else collapsing in the woods or worse. But then she realized Shadow wasn't barking in fear. He was signaling, calling out. His barks echoed, piercing the silence like a flare shot into the night. Rachel's breath hitched. Good boy, she whispered. Keep going. Don't stop. Shadow obeyed, barking in steady intervals, his voice carrying into the darkness. Rachel added her own voice, shouting hoarsely. Help. Somebody help us. The woods swallowed the sound, offering no reply. But she refused to give up. She kept shouting, kept pressing the damp cardigan to Miller's skin, kept clinging to his hand like sheer stubbornness could tether him to life. The soldier's lips moved faintly. Rachel leaned close, straining to hear. Too hot. Can't. His words broke into silence again. Rachel's throat tightened. You can. You hear me? You can. I'm not letting you quit, Miller. Not tonight. The minutes stretched endlessly. Sweat dripped down her back, her arms trembling from holding his weight. She wanted to collapse beside him, to give in to exhaustion. But then she looked at Shadow, standing like a sentinel, barking his steady signal into the night. And she realized quitting wasn't an option. Not for her. Not for Miller. She had been fighting battles of her own for years. Poverty, loneliness, exhaustion. Every day she pushed forward for Ethan's sake. Tonight was no different. This was just another battle. Only this time, it wasn't her survival at stake. Rachel squeezed Miller's hand tighter. You're not dying here. Not while I'm still breathing. Do you understand? The soldier didn't reply, but his chest rose once more. A fragile breath, enough to tell her the fight wasn't over. And as Rachel knelt in the dirt, Shadow's barks echoing like war drums in the distance, she understood something with chilling clarity. Until help came, she was all that stood between life and death. The forest was unnervingly silent between Shadow's barks, every sound swallowed by the thick wall of trees. Rachel's throat was raw from shouting, her arms aching from holding Miller's limp body. She glanced at her phone again, still no signal. Her heart sank. If no one had heard her cry for help, then she and Shadow were the soldier's only chance. Miller groaned faintly, his body twitching against the ground. His lips moved, whispering nonsense words broken and jumbled, fragments that spoke of confusion. Heat, patrol, stay low. His eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, clouded and distant, as though he were caught in another time. Another battlefield. Rachel squeezed his hand, grounding him to the present. You're not out there anymore, Miller. You're safe. You're with me. She didn't know if he understood, but she kept talking, her words sharp and steady. You survived worse. You're going to survive this too. Shadow let out another series of sharp barks, then darted a few steps away from them. His head turned back, eyes locked on Rachel as though waiting for her to follow. Rachel frowned. What is it, boy? Shadow barked again, this time more insistent. Before jogging further into the darkness, Rachel shook her head, torn between fear and instinct. I can't just leave him here, she muttered, glancing down at Miller. His chest rose shallowly, his breath so faint she had to press her ear near his mouth to feel them. He was fading fast, but Shadow didn't stop. He ran a few more yards, then circled back, barking wildly. His tail was stiff, his whole body quivering with urgency. He barked, ran forward, came back repeating the pattern again and again. Rachel's pulse quickened. Shadow wasn't abandoning them. He was trained. A military K9 doesn't panic. He was trying to lead her to something help, maybe, or a way to save Miller. Rachel dragged a shaky breath and made her decision. All right, Shadow. We're with you. Her arms slid beneath Miller's shoulders, straining as she tried to lift him. His weight bore down on her like an anchor. She grunted, muscles burning, and managed only a few inches before collapsing back to the ground. God, you're heavy, she whispered, sweat dripping down her forehead. But she refused to give up. Hooking her arms beneath his armpits, she began to drag him, inch by inch, her shoes slipping in the dirt. Come on, she muttered to herself, to Miller, to the night itself. Just a little further. Shadow led the way, darting forward, barking, then circling back to check on them. Each time his eyes met hers, Rachel felt a surge of determination. Shadow had a plan. She only needed to trust him. The path was uneven, littered with roots and rocks that scraped Miller's boots and tore at Rachel's knees. Her lungs burned, her arms shook, but she kept dragging him forward. Miller's head lolled against her shoulder, his breaths faint, but still there. That tiny flicker of life pushed her on. Shadow barked again, louder now, his voice echoing in the night. Rachel's heart thumped. Something was different. She strained her ears, listening. Beyond Shadow's barks, faint but real, came another sound, a distant hum. Engines, vehicles, her pulse leapt. Oh my God, she whispered. Shadow barked again, turning his head toward the sound. He sprinted forward down a narrower trail that branched from the main path, disappearing briefly before reappearing. Urging her on, Rachel gathered what little strength she had left and dragged Miller toward the sound. Her arms ached so badly she thought they'd snap, but she refused to stop. We're close, she panted. We're so close. Through the trees, faint beams of light pierced the darkness, headlights bouncing against the trail. A ranger truck. Rachel nearly sobbed. Shadow had led them straight to it. Help. She screamed, her voice cracking. Over here. The truck slowed, its headlights catching the scene. Rachel on her knees, dragging a soldier's limp body, Shadow barking furiously beside them. The driver slammed the brakes and leapt out, flashlight in hand. Ma'am? What happened? The ranger shouted, rushing toward them. Rachel could barely form words, her chest heaving. Soldier collapsed, heat stroke. He's barely breathing. The ranger knelt beside Miller, checking his pulse, then radioed into his shoulder mic. This is Ranger 2. I've got a downed soldier, male, unresponsive. Severe heat exhaustion. Send EMS immediately. Pine Hollow Trail, south entrance. Rachel slumped back, tears streaming down her cheeks. Relief and exhaustion flooded her body at once. She had dragged him far enough. She had kept him alive long enough, But even as she gasped for breath, she felt a paw press against her knee. She looked down to see Shadow sitting beside her, steady and calm now, his eyes reflecting the glow of the headlights. Rachel let out a shaky laugh. "You knew. You knew where to go." The ranger glanced at Shadow, eyebrows raised. "That dog of yours? He may have just saved this man's life." Rachel stroked Shadow's head with trembling fingers, her voice thick with emotion. "He's more than just my dog. He's a soldier, too." Miller groaned faintly, a sound that sent Rachel's heart soaring. "He wasn't gone yet. Not tonight," the ranger reassured her. "Stay calm. Paramedics are minutes away. You did good. You kept him alive." Rachel exhaled shakily, her gaze shifting to Shadow. She realized that if not for him, his training, his instincts, his unwavering determination, Miller would have died alone in the woods. Shadow leaned into her touch, as if quietly reminding her that this fight wasn't over yet. Help was coming, but for now, Miller still needed her to hold on. Rachel tightened her grip on the soldier's hand. "Don't stop fighting, Miller. You're going to make it. We've got you." And in the quiet glow of headlights, with Shadow standing tall beside her, Rachel understood. She wasn't just witnessing a miracle. She was part of it. The ranger's voice crackled over his radio, sharp and urgent. Unit 2 requesting immediate medevac response. Patient is male, mid-30s, military uniform, unconscious. Signs of severe heat stroke and dehydration. Possible complications. Over. Rachel sat slumped beside Miller, her hands trembling as she wiped sweat from her brow. Her body screamed with exhaustion, but her mind remained on high alert. She couldn't let him slip away now, not after they had come this far. Miller's skin was hot, nearly burning, his pulse thready beneath her fingers. His shallow breaths rattled in his chest, each one weaker than the last. She pressed her palm gently against his sternum, willing his lungs to keep moving. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare stop now. Not after Shadow found you help." Shadow lay beside Miller, head low but eyes sharp, watching every twitch of the soldier's body. Every so often, he nudged Miller's arm with his nose, a gentle push, as though reminding him not to give up. The ranger knelt again, shining his flashlight into Miller's pupils. "He's fading fast. We need those medics now." Rachel swallowed hard. "What do we do until they get here?" "Keep him cool," the ranger replied quickly. He stripped off his jacket and handed it to her. "Fan him with this. Try to lower his body temp. Heat stroke shuts the body down if we don't cool him. His organs could start failing." Rachel obeyed without question, waving the jacket over Miller's face and chest. Each movement of her arms was agony, but she pushed through the pain. Sweat dripped down her temples, but she didn't stop. Her eyes darted toward Shadow, who sat alert, ears perked. He let out a low bark and lifted his head higher, listening. Rachel stilled. "What is it, boy?" A moment later, she heard it too, the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder. Relief surged through her veins. "They're coming," she gasped, almost laughing with relief. The ranger nodded. "Just a few more minutes. Hold him steady." But those minutes stretched like an eternity. Miller's body convulsed briefly, his chest hitching. Rachel froze in terror. "No, no," she pleaded, shaking him gently. "Don't do this to me. Breathe." She leaned down, pressing her ear to his mouth. Faint, but still there. His breath rattled back into rhythm. Rachel exhaled shakily, brushing damp hair from her face. Her mind flashed back to the adoption center, where she first met Shadow. He hadn't been like the other dogs. Quiet, disciplined, his eyes always scanning the room as if he were still on patrol. The handler had told her, "This boy's a veteran. Iraq tours. Saved lives out there before he was retired." He doesn't just see the world, he reads it. Back then, she hadn't understood the weight of those words. Now, as Shadow crouched beside Miller, his ears tilting toward the approaching sirens, Rachel finally did. Shadow wasn't just her dog. He was a soldier who hadn't forgotten his mission to save lives. Distant wail grew into a roar as flashing red and white lights cut through the forest path. The ranger stood and waved his flashlight high, signaling the medics. "Over here." He shouted. The ambulance pulled up, 2 paramedics leaping out with equipment in hand. Shadow barked furiously, guiding them straight to Miller's side. One paramedic knelt by Miller, checking vitals while the other opened a kit. "Core temps spiking," one said quickly. "Get 4 fluids going now." They worked with mechanical precision, inserting in 4 into Miller's arm, attaching monitors, slipping an oxygen mask over his face. The steady hiss of oxygen filled the air, mixing with the rapid beeps of equipment. Rachel sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white. She wanted to help, but all she could do now was watch. "Patient's critical, but stable for transport," the paramedic announced after several tense minutes. "We need him at the hospital immediately." Rachel blinked at the word stable, tears welling in her eyes. He wasn't safe yet, but he had a chance. They loaded Miller carefully onto a stretcher. Shadow whined low, pacing as though unwilling to let them take him away. Rachel reached down, stroking his fur. "It's okay, boy. They'll take care of him now." The ranger turned to her, his face stern but kind. "You saved his life tonight. You and that dog of yours. Without you dragging him here, he'd never have made it." Rachel shook her head, her voice thick with emotion. "It wasn't me. It was Shadow. He knew where to go. He knew how to lead us." The ranger glanced at the K9, who now stood at full attention, eyes locked on the departing stretcher. "Then I'd say Shadow's still on active duty, ma'am." The words hit Rachel hard. She looked down at Shadow, her throat tightening. For years, she had felt alone, struggling as a single mother, burdened by responsibility. But tonight, she realized she had never been truly alone. Shadow had been her partner, her protector, her silent strength. And now, he had saved another life. The paramedics lifted the stretcher into the ambulance, doors slamming shut. The sirens wailed once more, carrying Miller into the night. Rachel stood in the glow of the fading lights, her chest heaving, tears streaking her face. Relief mingled with exhaustion, but she knew this wasn't the end of the story. Something had shifted tonight. She crouched beside Shadow, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. "You did it, boy," she whispered into his fur. "You brought him back." Shadow pressed his head against her shoulder, steady as ever. In his silence, Rachel felt the unspoken truth. The night had tested them, and together, they had passed Dot as the ambulance disappeared into the distance. Rachel finally allowed herself to collapse against the ground, clutching Shadow close. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel afraid of what tomorrow might bring, because now she understood Shadow wasn't just a reminder of the battles of the past. He was proof that even broken soldiers could still save lives. And Rachel knew deep in her heart that this was only the beginning of something bigger. The sirens faded into the distance as the ambulance carrying Sergeant Miller tore down the winding road. Rachel stood motionless, her breath ragged, watching the lights disappear into the night. Her arms hung limp at her sides, every ounce of strength drained from dragging and fighting to keep the soldier alive. Beside her, Shadow sat tall and silent, chest rising and falling steadily. His ears flicked back as if still tuned to every sound of the forest. Rachel reached down and brushed her trembling fingers over his head. His fur was warm beneath her palm, solid and grounding. The ranger, who had stayed behind after the ambulance left, touched her shoulder gently. "You all right, ma'am?" Rachel let out a bitter laugh. All right? I don't even know. My arms feel like they're falling off. My heart hasn't slowed down since I found him. But she paused, swallowing hard. He's alive. That's what matters. The ranger gave her a firm nod. He's alive because of you. Rachel shook her head. Not me. Shadow. At the sound of his name, Shadow looked up, ears pricking forward. His amber eyes seemed to pierce straight through the ranger, as if silently daring him to question it. The ranger crouched and scratched the dog's neck. Then you've got one hell of a partner here. His voice softened. I've worked search and rescue long enough to know when I'm looking at a hero. Rachel felt her throat tighten. She had adopted Shadow 2 years ago, telling herself she was just giving an old war dog a peaceful retirement. She had never expected nights like this nights, where his training and instincts would mean the difference between life and death. She glanced at the ranger, a sudden thought hitting her. Do you think they'll let me know what happens to him? The soldier? They'll keep you updated, the ranger reassured. He'll be taken to County General. The medics said he's in critical condition, but stable enough for transport. That's something. Rachel nodded slowly. She wanted more certainty, but she knew she wouldn't get it tonight. The ranger offered to drive her back into town. At first, Rachel wanted to refuse. She hated leaving the spot where she had fought so hard to save Miller, but exhaustion left her with no choice. She climbed into the passenger seat, Shadow leaping gracefully into the back, and the ranger steered them out of the dark woods. The ride was quiet. The forest pressed against the glass, shadows dancing in the headlights. Rachel stared out the window, her hand resting on Shadow's paw. She thought of the soldier lying in the ambulance, fighting for his life, and of Shadow's determined barks that had guided them straight to help Dot by the time they reached Rachel's modest house at the edge of town. Her body was shaking with fatigue. The ranger offered one last nod before driving away. She stumbled inside, Shadow trailing close behind. The house was dark, her son already asleep upstairs. She collapsed onto the couch, Shadow curling against her feet. For the first time since the nightmare began, silence settled over her. Rachel pressed her face into her hands, tears streaming freely now. Not tears of fear, but of release. She whispered hoarsely, "We did it, Shadow. You saved him." Shadow shifted closer, resting his head on her lap. His eyes gleamed in the faint light, steady and unshaken, as though nothing about the night had surprised him. Rachel stroked his ears. A faint smile breaking through the exhaustion. Morning light spilled through the blinds before Rachel finally woke. Her body ached, but her mind was instantly alert, flooded with memories of the night before. She sat upright, heart pounding. Her phone buzzed on the table. With shaking hands, she grabbed it. A message glowed on the screen. County General Hospital. Sergeant Aaron Miller admitted. ICU. Condition. Critical but improving. Rachel exhaled sharply, relief flooding through her chest. He's alive, she whispered. Shadow thumped his tail once, as if confirming he already knew. Later that afternoon, Rachel drove to the hospital. Shadow rode beside her in the back seat, nose pressed against the window. She wasn't sure they would let her see Miller, but something inside her insisted she had to try. When she arrived, she was stopped at the front desk. Family only, the nurse said kindly but firmly. Rachel's lips parted in protest, but before she could speak, a man in uniform approached. It was one of the EMTs from the night before. Recognition lit his face. You're the one who found him. Rachel nodded hesitantly. Yes. How? How is he? The EMT's voice softened. He's hanging on. Still weak, but stable. If you hadn't dragged him to the trail, if your dog hadn't brought us in, we'd be talking about a body, not a recovery. Rachel felt her chest tighten. She glanced down at Shadow, who stood proudly at her side. The EMT crouched, patting Shadow's flank. "This guy here, he's a hero. Tell me something I don't know," Rachel said softly, her eyes misting. The EMT hesitated, then leaned closer. "I'll see if I can get you in to visit. That soldier deserves to know who pulled him back from the edge." An hour later, Rachel found herself standing in a quiet hospital room. Machines beeped steadily, tubes and wires connecting Sergeant Miller to monitors and IVs. His face was pale, lips cracked, but his chest rose rhythmically. Rachel's breath caught. She hadn't realized until now how much she needed to see him alive. Shadow stepped forward first, padding softly toward the bed. He pressed his nose against Miller's hand, letting out a low whine. Miller stirred faintly, eyelids fluttering. His cracked lips moved, voice rough and broken. "Shadow?" Rachel froze. Her gaze shot to the canine. Shadow tilted his head but didn't move, his eyes locked on the soldiers. Rachel stepped closer. You know him?" Miller blinked weakly, his voice rasping. "K9 unit, Iraq? That dog, he saved my unit once." His hand twitched, fingers brushing Shadow's fur. "Thought I'd never see him again." Rachel's breath hitched. Her knees nearly gave out as she gripped the edge of the bed. Shadow hadn't just saved Miller's life last night. He had saved him years ago, in another war, in another place, and somehow fate had brought them together again. Rachel whispered, almost in awe, "You too. You were partners." Miller's faint smile flickered across his tired face. "Brothers." Shadow pressed closer, his body trembling with recognition. Rachel realized this wasn't just a reunion, it was destiny. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the hospital room, a slow rhythm that reassured Rachel with every beat. She sat in a chair beside Miller's bed, Shadow curled loyally at her feet. For the first time in 2 days, she wasn't afraid he might stop breathing. His color had returned, his chest rose and fell with more strength, and his eyes, though still heavy with exhaustion, were finally clear. Rachel studied him quietly. The soldier she had found broken and collapsing in the woods was now tethered to IV lines and oxygen, but he was alive. That fact alone felt like a miracle. "You really don't have to sit here all day," Miller rasped suddenly, his voice soft but steady. His eyes flicked toward her. "You've got a life to live outside this room." Rachel gave a small smile. "I do. But right now, my life happens to be sitting here, making sure you don't try to run off into another forest." A faint laugh escaped him, though it quickly dissolved into a cough. He winced, but waved off her concern. "Guess I owe you more than thanks." Rachel's gaze softened. "You don't owe me anything. You owe Shadow. He's the one who knew how to save you." At the sound of his name, Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching. Miller reached a weak hand toward him, fingers brushing the dog's fur. "I can't believe it's really him. All these years." His voice cracked with something Rachel couldn't quite name. Relief, grief, maybe both. Rachel leaned forward. "You served with him, didn't you?" Miller nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "He wasn't just a dog. He was my partner, my family out there. We ran missions that should have killed us both a dozen times. He found IEDs before they found us. Pulled me out when I was hit once. There were days, I swear, I only kept moving because I saw him keep moving." Rachel swallowed hard. She had known Shadow was a military K9, but hearing it from Miller painted the picture in sharper detail. Shadow wasn't just a reminder of Miller's past, he was proof of it. "What happened?" she asked gently. Miller's gaze dropped to his hands. "One mission went bad. Ambush. Chaos. Shadow was injured, and the higher-ups pulled him from service. I thought he'd be gone forever. Most handlers don't get to see their dogs after retirement. And then, he trailed off, eyes flicking toward her. Then he shows up again. With you. Rachel's lips trembled into a faint smile. He's been my rock these past 2 years. My son adores him. I thought I was just giving him a home. Turns out, he's still working missions when I'm not looking. Shadow shifted, pressing his head into Miller's lap, as though he too remembered every battle they had shared. Miller's hand rested against his fur, shaking slightly. I lost a lot of men. I carry their faces with me every day. But Shadow, he's one of the ones I never thought I'd see again. And now, here he is, dragging me back to life all over again. Rachel felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to say something that might ease the weight he carried, but all she managed was, "Then maybe fate decided you weren't done yet." Miller looked at her for a long moment. His eyes weren't just tired, they were haunted, like a man who had fought too many battles, both in the field and in his own head. "Sometimes I wonder if I should have been done," he admitted quietly. Rachel's breath caught. She reached out, gently taking his hand. "Don't say that. Not after everything. You matter. You being here matters to Shadow, to me, to the men you saved, to your country. You don't get to decide you're done just because it's heavy." Miller's eyes shimmered, his jaw tightening. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy but unbroken. Shadow broke it first with a low huff, shifting his weight as though impatient with human hesitation. Miller chuckled weakly, stroking the dog's ears. "Still bossing me around, huh? Some things never change." Rachel leaned back, watching the two of them reconnect. A warmth spread in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't just looking at a soldier and his dog. She was looking at two survivors who had found their way back to each other against all odds. Days passed, and Miller grew stronger. The tubes were removed, the monitors lessened. He could sit up now, even walk a few careful steps around the room. And every step he took, Shadow shadowed him, never straying more than a few feet away. Rachel visited daily, often bringing her son along. The boy would climb onto Miller's bed with an ease that surprised her, telling him stories about school and soccer games. At first, Miller seemed awkward, unused to the chatter of a child. But slowly he softened, listening, even laughing at the boy's jokes. One evening, as Rachel prepared to leave, Miller stopped her with a quiet voice. "Why do you do it?" She blinked. "Do what?" "Come here. Sit with me. Bring your son." "You don't owe me anything, Rachel." "You barely know me." Rachel hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Because you're not alone. You think you are, but you're not." Shadow knew that. "And maybe I know what it feels like to think no one's coming for you. But someone should. Always." Miller looked at her with something raw in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe. Or hope. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, settling instead for a quiet, "Thank you." Rachel smiled softly. "You don't need to thank me. Just get better." "That's enough." Shadow wagged his tail once, as if sealing the deal. The hospital staff began to talk about releasing Miller soon, though he still had weeks of recovery ahead. Word of the rescue had spread quietly, at first among rangers, EMTs, and soldiers stationed nearby. But soon whispers grew louder. The story of a single mom, her retired war dog, and a soldier pulled from the brink of death by fate and instinct, was making its way through town. Rachel hadn't sought recognition. She had simply done what needed to be done. But she could feel it coming, that what happened in the woods wasn't going to remain just their secret. As she left the hospital one evening, Shadow trotting faithfully by her side, Rachel felt something shift deep inside her. What began as a terrifying night had turned into a thread weaving her life with Miller's, binding them through courage, survival, and an extraordinary dog who refused to let go of either of them. And Rachel knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something none of them had expected. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. Rachel sat in the chair beside Sergeant Miller's bed, Shadow curled protectively at her feet. Outside, the sounds of the city hummed faintly a normal, ordinary day, but inside, the air carried a quiet tension. The weight of weeks of recovery and courage finally lifting. Miller was awake, alert, and his color had returned. The beeping of monitors was less frantic now, a gentle, steady reminder that life was moving forward. His eyes, once clouded with pain and confusion, held a clarity that was both relieved and thoughtful. Rachel smiled softly, brushing her hair back from her face. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Miller said, his voice still raspy but firm. "Stronger. Thanks to you." His gaze fell to Shadow, who wagged his tail once in acknowledgement. "And thanks to him. The old boy still has it, huh?" Shadow's ears perked, and he let out a low, satisfied huff, pressing his head against Miller's leg. Rachel chuckled, brushing her hand over Shadow's fur. "I think he's pleased with himself, too." Not that he'd admit it. Miller gave a faint laugh, a sound that carried the kind of relief only a man who has faced death and survived could produce. "I don't think I've ever had a reunion quite like this. Out of all the missions, all the years apart, I never expected to see him again. And yet, here we are. He saved me again." Rachel leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of the past weeks settle around her. Sometimes the right people, or the right dogs, show up at exactly the right time. Miller nodded, his eyes misting slightly. "Yeah, and sometimes you realize life doesn't just hand you second chances. You have to fight for them. And he gestured to Rachel and Shadow. "I was lucky to have both of you there when it mattered most." The quiet in the room was broken by the soft hum of the door opening. A nurse entered, followed by two men in uniform. Their presence commanded attention, and Rachel straightened instinctively, Shadow rising to stand beside her. "Sergeant Miller," one of the officers said, his voice formal but warm. "On behalf of the U.S. Army and the Veterans Affairs K-9 program, we want to recognize the extraordinary actions taken to save your life. And we want to recognize the hero who led you to safety." Miller looked puzzled, then his gaze fell on Shadow. His lips parted, and he whispered, He's getting recognized?" Rachel's eyes widened. "Shadow?" she asked, incredulous. The officer nodded. "Yes, your K-9 partner. Though retired from active duty, his actions last night exemplify the highest standards of training, loyalty, and courage. He saved a life, a soldier's life. That deserves recognition." Miller's chest swelled with emotion, a mix of pride and disbelief. He leaned closer to Shadow, resting his hand against the dog's thick neck. "You old war hero. I didn't think they'd ever officially acknowledge you. I'm glad you get it now." Rachel's throat tightened, and she reached down to stroke Shadow's fur. "I've always known you were extraordinary," she whispered. "But now everyone else will too." Later that week, the story spread beyond the hospital walls. Local news outlets picked up the report. Single mom and retired military K-9. Rescue soldier from heat stroke in Pine Hollow Woods. The article highlighted Rachel's quick thinking, Shadow's instincts, and Miller's survival. It captured hearts across the community. The hospital staff arranged a small ceremony to honor Shadow. Miller, now steady on his feet, stood beside Rachel as the retired war dog was presented with a special medal. Shadow, ever composed, wagged his tail as if he understood every word of praise. Miller knelt beside him, rubbing his ears affectionately. "See? You're a legend. Not just to me, but to everyone." Rachel watched, tears streaming down her cheeks. She realized that life had brought them all together for reasons she couldn't yet fully explain. She had begun the journey as a single mom trying to navigate her ordinary life. And now she was part of something extraordinary, a bond forged through courage, instinct, and unwavering loyalty. As the days turned into weeks, Miller began physical therapy for his weakened muscles and fatigue, steadily regaining strength. Shadow became a constant companion, never leaving his side. And Rachel, who had once felt the weight of solitude, found herself part of an unusual but remarkable family. One evening, Rachel, Miller, and Shadow sat together in her modest living room. Her son, Ethan, climbed onto Miller's lap, chattering animatedly about school. Shadow lay at their feet, ears flicking as he listened attentively. Miller smiled down at the boy. "So you've got a little partner here, huh?" Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, and he's the best dog ever." Rachel laughed softly, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. "He's a little more than that," she said, glancing at Shadow. "He's a hero, and he keeps us all safe." Miller looked at her, his expression earnest. "You know, I thought life after the army would feel empty. But now I see there's still purpose. Still missions that matter, like living, helping, protecting each other. I can't explain it, but being here with you two, it feels right." Rachel reached over, placing her hand on his. "It does," she agreed. "Life has a funny way of surprising you. Sometimes the right people or dogs come into your life when you least expect it, and they change everything." Shadow lifted his head, resting it on Miller's knee. The three of them sat together, a single mom, a recovering soldier, and a war dog who had defied odds to protect the life of his partner once more. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the bond forming within the living room. But inside, time slowed. The past's shadows were fading, replaced by hope, gratitude, and the promise of new beginnings. Rachel looked at Shadow, then at Miller, and whispered, "We make a pretty good team, don't we?" Miller nodded, a faint smile breaking across his face. "The best team," he said. Shadow thumped his tail against the floor, content. He didn't need words, he had done his duty. But the gentle nudge of his head against Rachel's hand and Miller's leg said it all. In that quiet room, laughter, gratitude, and relief mingled. And though their journey had begun with danger and desperation, it ended with a truth as simple as it was profound. Loyalty, courage, and love could save lives, and sometimes they could create a family where none had existed before. As the evening sun dipped behind the horizon, the trio sat together, a unit forged not on a battlefield, but through the extraordinary events of one life-changing night. They had survived, they had healed, and together, they had begun a new chapter, one where every day carried the promise of second chances, and every heartbeat reminded them of the power of courage, instinct, and unwavering love.